In this video, I'm going to show you how to take the stock prices, plot them, estimate returns, and then do some descriptive statistics with the actual returns. So this type of data I will give you. So you can go to Yahoo Finance or some place like that and look at this data. They've made it a little bit harder for you to download historical data from Yahoo Finance, but this would be similar to the type of data you could get from a place like that. But for this class, I will give it to you. So the first thing we want to do is plot the data. So we've already made histograms and scatter plots using the real estate data that we worked with earlier. If you want to make a line plot, the only one that really makes sense in this class is if you have the date on the x-axis and a value on the y-axis. So if you want to make a line plot, always have the data sorted or arranged so that the date is the leftmost column, and then the things you want to plot are on the right side, because the Excel defaults whatever's on the right side to the vertical axis. So if we want to plot this and make a line plot of SPY, which is something that tracks the S&P 500, and then we have NVIDIA as this other ticker. So these are prices. So we want to plot the prices over time. We can highlight the three columns right here. Insert. I'm gonna go recommended, and there's the line chart. So just to do that one more time, may have done that a little too fast. Highlight these. Insert. Recommended chart. The first one is what we want. So here we have SPY is the blue line, NVIDIA is the red line, and we can see that the prices are very different, that they're both trending up, but the price of NVIDIA is much lower than the price of SPY. But we don't really care about the price. What we really care about is the return. So if $1 was invested in SPY versus NVIDIA, which one would provide the highest return? It's not necessarily the one with the highest price, it's the one with the largest percent change in the price. So we have to generate the returns using a formula that you're going to use over and over again in this class. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this plot right here. And I'm going to come to the right here, and I'm going to do SPY return, and then NVIDIA. We always want to keep things in the same order. If you have SPY on the left, you want SPY on the left here, and NVIDIA on the right. So when we drag these formulas over, we get the correct values under the correct columns. So we're always going to estimate a return using a formula that looks something like this. New divided by old minus 1. Where new is the current price, old is the previous period price, and then we're going to subtract 1 from that. So to do this in Excel, you always start one cell down. So we can't estimate the return here because there's nothing before it that we can use to estimate the return. So we come down 1, and we're going to do equals B3 divided by B2 minus 1. So this is the ratio. So it's the ratio minus 1. So if we take this, notice that this value is smaller than this value, which means the ratio is going to be less than 1. When you subtract 1 from it, you're going to get a negative number. So let's do the same thing for NVIDIA. So if we just drag that over, this number is bigger than this number, so the ratio will be larger than 1. So when we subtract 1, it's going to be positive. But these are both percentages, but in a decimal form. So I'm going to highlight these two cells, come to the bottom right of this where you get that little black cross, double click, and it's going to paste that formula all the way down to the bottom. So every one of these would be the current price divided by the previous price. We want to make that look a little bit nicer, so we want to highlight these two cells, click the little percent. So if you're on the Home tab, click the percent to format that as a percentage, and then we want to give ourselves 2 decimal places. So how do we interpret this? This tells us that between January and February 2020, SPY returned negative 7.92%. So the price fell by 7.92%. NVIDIA increased by 14.23%. This says between March and February 2020, SPY had a negative 13% return. NVIDIA had a negative 2.34% return. Here, SPY increased 13.36% compared to 10.88% for NVIDIA. So we want to plot these returns. So we can do the same thing. We can highlight date. I'm going to hold Command on a Mac, Control on a Windows machine. Highlight A, D, and E. Insert, recommended chart, and then we can plot those. And those are the monthly returns. So we can see that NVIDIA had a lot more volatility. It was much more volatile than SPY. But it's hard to get a good estimate of the means just by looking at that plot. But for both of them, sometimes the return was positive, sometimes the return was negative. So we'll need to do some descriptive statistics to figure out what the mean and standard deviations actually are for those two. But this is something you're going to do consistently in this class. I'm going to give you prices and have you generate returns. So let me tell you some of the most common mistakes that I see here. One of the most common mistakes is people start up here. So instead of starting here and doing B3 minus B2, students have a habit of doing this. And I'll show you how to spot the mistake. Students want to start up here and then do B3 divided by B2. I'm sorry, B3 minus B2, I have to subtract 1 from that. And then they run that down. But notice all of these returns are technically correct, the correct number, but they're in the wrong spot. But when you get to the bottom, you see negative 100%. This is one way of knowing you did it incorrectly, because this is dividing this number that does not exist by 582, which Excel treats this missing blank as a 0. So it says the stock went from this to 0, which is a 100% decrease in price. So if you start your cell and you run it down, you're going to get this extra number right here that should not be there. So don't do that. You always want to start right here, one cell down, B3 divided by B2 minus 1. And if you keep it in your mind, it's current divided by previous. Well, you don't have a previous if you start in row 2. So make sure you start in row 3 so that you have something beside it and something above it. All right, so that's one mistake people make. So this is what it should look like. You should get this last cell should reference these last two things right here. I also see people subtract instead of divide, which is incorrect. So students want to do this minus this, okay? And that is incorrect. So if you do that minus 1, notice we get negative 2,400%, which is a wild number. So it's always current divided by previous minus 1. So let's get these back up here. So this is going to be B3 divided by B2 minus 1. We're going to drag that over. And then bottom right, double click, run it down. And then from there, we want to generate just some basic summary statistics. So we want the mean, standard deviation. We'll just do those two for now. And this is going to be for the SPY return. And then this will be for the NVIDIA return. So notice how I reference those columns just to make sure everything is staying in the correct order. So the average here is going to be the average of the return column, not the price column, of D colon D. And then it's going to be standard deviation dot S, always the sample, D:D. You can always do the return column, not the price column. We can go ahead and format that as a percent too. Give ourselves 2 decimal places. And we want to drag that over. And now we can make a comparison of SPY to NVIDIA. So SPY had a lower return, an average return over this period of 1.29%. Again, this is monthly, so that's an average of a 1.29% per month return, where NVIDIA had a 6.45% return. Monthly, the average monthly return was 6.45%, which is pretty remarkable. And this is why you have to be careful comparing prices. NVIDIA had a much lower price, but a much higher return than the SPY. But it also had a lot more variance. So if you're someone who's more risk averse, you're closer to retirement, you need to be a little more conservative with your investment. SPY might be a better fit for you than NVIDIA. If you're someone who has a 30-year time horizon before you think about retiring, you may be able to tolerate a little more risk. But those are all things you'll learn about in a finance class. I'm not here to teach you the finance. I'm just here to help you understand the statistics behind some of this stuff. So one more thing I want to do here is just make a quick pivot table so that we can plot the distribution of these returns, because later on we're going to assume they're normal. So let me just refresh the pivot table one more time. And I'm only going to do it for SPY, but you can do the same thing for NVIDIA if you wanted to. So I'm going to highlight the SPY return. And I want to insert a pivot table. I want to put it right here. Again, make sure you highlight the return column, not the price column. I want to bring SPY into rows. I want to bring SPY into values. I want to make sure we change that to count, not the sum. And let's go ahead and plot this. And then we'll change the bin width later. So notice we get ones everywhere. Since this is a continuous variable, it is nearly impossible to have the same return show up more than one time. So this histogram makes absolutely no sense. So what we have to do is when we click on our row labels, we have to group this. And here you have to be careful with your percents because these are in decimal form. So 0.01 is 1%. So let's try to group it in bins of 10%, so 0.1. And we don't really get, that's too wide. That's way too wide because the variance is pretty low. So let's try that again. Let's do increments of 2.5%. So 2.5% would be 0.025. Let's look at that. And that gives us some feel for the distribution of that variable. So we can see the lowest return was all the way down here at about negative 13%. The highest return was up here around positive 13%. And we get some feel for the shape of that distribution. Now this doesn't look very nice, but that's okay. We don't really care about how it looks. All we really care about is this actual distribution right here. So that's something you will do a lot in this class. You will take prices, you'll estimate the returns, and then you'll apply the descriptive statistics to those returns.